Welcome to Demo Day, where young innovators take the stage and showcase real-world projects to a global audience. At WEquil School, students learn to become innovators, teaching each other each week through their creations. WEquil App has thousands of novel and useful projects born out of our students' strengths, interests, and passions. But Demo Day is more than just a presentation. It's a celebration of innovation, collaboration, and the power of young minds. Join us on this incredible journey of inspiration as we witness the next generation of problem solvers and leaders. From Harvard professors to industry experts, our Demo Days attract incredible guest speakers who share their knowledge and ignite curiosity. Whether you're a young innovator looking to showcase your creations or a family seeking an extraordinary learning experience, Demo Day is here for you. Together, let's create a world where young minds flourish, ideas come to life, and innovation knows no boundaries. Join us for an unforgettable journey of learning, growth, and discovery. Welcome to Demo Day.
This week, I wrote a project on what is socialization. So this is something that has been particularly interesting to us as, homeschoolers who are also running a learning community and also used to be in public school. And as human connection is an essential component of understanding our world, ourselves, and the broader social landscape, it is a complicated concept that influences us not only socially, but our ability to achieve success and find meaning and fulfillment in our lives. So in its simplest form, it can be thought of as a process of learning and interacting with the norms and beliefs of our society and the exchange of influences between an individual and their surrounding social environment as it shapes our perspectives, our sense of self, and our ability to interact with the world around us. And so first, to understand socialization, it's widely recognized as just the process of learning to behave in a way that's acceptable to society. And so there is really no objective outcome of socialization because it'll differ based off of the times, norms, and cultural expectation. This is why it can be hard to measure, even understand, because there's a lot of different environments and cultures around the world. And before the internet, you could know if your child was socialized very easily just by whether or not they were able to interact effectively with the people around them. But now you also have to consider a lot of the future environments and places that they'll need to operate within, given that those potential environments are much more broad, given that we have the ability to interact with everyone from around the world. So there's a lot of different purposes of socialization, including just development for the individuals and society as a whole. People learn to communicate, interact with each other and participate in social activities. This can also help individuals develop a sense of identity and belonging, and allow humans to work together in large numbers. But these social norms aren't necessarily based on truth. So as humans are social mammals, we crave emotional connection and acceptance from others, and we can't be happy on our own. But we also need to consider what is true to ourselves and also have critical thinking, which may lead us away from the herd as well. So there are also a lot of potential health consequences that are correlated with a lack of feeling connection and having social isolation. Such as studies that suggest that a lack of socialization in old age can lead to physical and mental health problems, including heart disease, dementia, and depression. And so while it is important to think differently and being an innovator is an important skill to learn, it also goes against our natural course of action learned through evolution. Because if you weren't compliant with the whole group identity, then you were ostracized and you weren't going to be able to survive on your own. But kind of the most fundamental purpose of socialization is becoming just socially desirable. That can be understood as just understanding like universal truths and behaviors while interacting with others, like being respectful, kind, listening, and showing interest towards others. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody likes you or agrees with you, but that you are able to just it's not like everybody despises being around you because kind of just basic human etiquette of how to interact with Um, Next is kind of a term that I was using to describe socialization, which is reactive versus adaptive socialization, kind of to be thought of on a spectrum of you can have socialization where if you're only exposed to a few environments, then you can kind of learn how do I operate within these environments, but it isn't really a generalizable skill of being able to move between different settings and know how to act within them. And so I think that like reactive socialization is when you've only been exposed to a few environments, and adaptive socialization is more of a kind of a multi-purpose scale of being able to adapt to the social cultures, norms, and expectations based off of the setting. And so there isn't really a fine distinction between the two, but more of like on a spectrum based on how much exposure you've had to different sort of environments. So the next section is kind of talking about my experience in public school with socialization. And since we have met many homeschoolers and have also been in public school ourselves, I've kind of seen the value and downsides that public school can bring in the context of socialization. I do find a lot of value specifically in kind of a structured environment during the elementary years to learn basic skills like reading, writing, math, but then also things like following directions and working with others. And so at times we have found it hard to coordinating with homeschoolers and doing group activities that require things like adhering to rules and being punctual and following directions, which is not to say that homeschooling can't teach these skills, but since you're enforcing these systems and skills yourself, it requires a lot more discipline and intention. And so I would say in public school, there was a lot of socializing, but a specific kind based off of the environment and the kids that I was interacting with. And while public school did teach like how to follow directions, respect authority, and work with others, and gave me exposure to lots of people, but the environment was mostly made up of kids, and adults had very little influence on the social dynamics or like one-on-one time with kids as well. And also it provided a specific kind of socialization of knowing how to interact with kids my age, which is important, but then there's also a lot of other environments such as knowing how to interact with adults and also in professional settings, which wasn't really taught in public school. So there are also some downsides of socialization that I notice, including negative peer pressure, which can cause you to kind of do things that you might have otherwise not have done, as well as kind of conformity and loss of individuality if you're overly stressing the importance of, being able to fit in with others. Then reactive socialization, as I talked about as well, where you can be really good at socializing in maybe this kind of microcosm environment of only kids your age, but when you go outside of that, do you really have the skills to interact with other people in different settings? Next is also social media pressures. In the digital age, socialization can also include interactions on social media, which can lead to feelings of inadequacy, especially because there are objective ways to compare yourself to other people. And lastly is increased anxiety and stress if you're overly kind of thinking about how am I different from other people and the social expectations. Next is transitioning to homeschooling and how it was a different social landscape. Especially, this was very different from being in public school. In some ways, like engaging virtually resulted in less ability to read body language and facial expressions, but also allowed for interactions with a much more diverse set of people. For younger kids, I think in-person relationships is very important because a lot of it is built around organic play. But for older kids and adults, it's more centered around shared interests, values, and goals. And so there are a few ways, as I was talking about earlier, homeschooling doesn't mean that you aren't socialized, but it just requires a lot more effort and intention. And so there are a few ways to think about this. While there are risks to that, there's also a lot of upside potential of not only providing adequate socialization, but also mitigating risks and cultivating adaptive socialization. One is engaging with all ages, whether that means people younger than you or adults. When you're older, you're going to be interacting with people of all ages, so it makes sense that you would be able to practice that while you're a kid. Next is having a consistent peer group. This can be really hard for homeschoolers, but is very important. And we're trying to help with that with our application WEquil App, where you can create micro schools or virtual learning pods, which you can learn more about in the other article that I linked in here. Next is having exposure to professional settings, and as from a young age, so learning how to introduce yourself and connect with others in these situations. Next is integrating virtual environments, knowing how to interact with people from around the world. Also understanding yourself, because it's really hard to think about who you are objectively without thinking about how you're different from other people. And so having exposure to that can really help you understand, how am I different and who am I? And lastly, having shared principles and not shared beliefs. Of course, you want to interact with people who have different points of view, but shared principles can help with cultivating, a respectful environment of like certain principles, like being respectful towards others, providing each individual's freedom. That can create an uplifting and empowering environment for kids. And so, in conclusion, I think the concept of socialization is very important, and thinking a lot about how we can actually intentionally cultivate opportunities for socialization and in a broader sort of sense. And so, as somebody who's been in public school and homeschool, I see there are some risks that can come with it, but also a lot of upside potential. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
Round of applause. Great job on your master's thesis, Sumay.
Yeah, sorry, it's pretty long.
No, it's great. I think, well, it's a complicated topic. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question or comment. I had one for you. What's something in this that you think stands out as an insight or point of view that you have that a lot of people that homeschool might either not be aware of or disagree with? Like, where do you see what you're thinking on this being different from homeschoolers in particular?
I think kind of the broader concept of socialization in terms of interacting in professional contexts and with adults and with people around the world. A lot of focus for homeschoolers, I think they're like, oh, I need my kid to be around other kids. There's like a lot of emphasis on that. Whereas like when they get older, they're going to be interacting with adults. So you need to know how to do that. And it's a different sort of environment and way that you need to learn in terms of like, how do you communicate and how do you interact with people? So I would say kind of just looking at that more broadly than just, I need my kid to know how to socialize with other kids, which of course is important, but I think it shouldn't just be focused on that.
Cool. Any questions, comments? I mean, feel free to, you're not gonna—
I have a comment.
Yeah, go for it.
So Joe was making a joke that you had a master's thesis there. It does seem like that, you've done a lot of research there, and you may be getting to the point in your career where you want to be adding footnotes and resource and references.
I do have one reference.
I just saw that. I saw the one there.
Yeah.
And the next step, of course, will be to publish, but we'll talk about that later.
She did publish it.
Yeah.
On WEquil App, bro.
Well, I think that a lot of it is kind of like there are of course studies, and I did look at a lot of them, and I didn't necessarily think it was super accurately representing what I was trying to communicate, especially because we have a very different approach, and because a lot of it came from like my experience just interacting with a lot of these different people, and so I couldn't necessarily like find too many other places that were discussing the same sorts of things.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But
well, like one thing, like, so Chloe, who's here, so she's never met Isla, but they're hanging out all the time and they have this beautiful relationship, right? We haven't found a lot of, or like hardly any examples of kids that are able to have that level of quality of relationship that's been 100% virtual and regular for like months and months on end. This is something that finding a reference for that would be very challenging.
Yeah.
The reference is, hey, Isla,
Yeah.
publish something about your experience that Sumay can link.
Right.
But I do agree with my dad though.
Yeah,
we
yeah,
should get some of
definitely.
this out there. So.
Uh-huh.
Any other comments, questions?
Well, it is a little bit long, so maybe you could like put it into like part 1 on socialization, part 2 on socialization, just to break it up a little bit, make it easier to read.
I guess it just depends.
Well, I
on the
did try to like make an outline of like the header so that you can kind of skim through the points, but I do agree that it is a bit lengthy.
I like the length though.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some cases having multiple parts makes sense if they're distinct from each other, but I think if you read one without the other, it might not provide like the correct context. Because if I'm just talking about homeschoolers without knowing like that I was in public school, then it can be hard to like, you know, take my opinions in context of the whole story. So
I think your article really provides a very comprehensive viewpoints and very balanced. And I would like to challenge Sumay because you are so good at like writing at very broad, big picture level, right? You basically took all the data points, your experiences, and you summarized it. It's like like a research paper. But I think it would be, I would challenge you to write it in a way that's like with more stories, and people are more relatable, right? Share your stories and articulate a point. I think there are probably like 20 points you are trying to articulate in one article.
It reads like a manual, but I kind of
like
when I think if I was gonna send this to some homeschoolers, I'm like, here's
it's like it is very dense. It's like reading a research paper. But if you like have 20 stories making 20 points and write it in a way like people are very relatable, I think it will have more impact. Your work will have more impact.
So just make it shorter, like Isla said, and then add stories.
Yeah. That'll be a book.
We're gonna have to move on though to get into the other demos, right?
Yep. Yeah. Good point.
Oh wait, Alexia. I was just curious. Did you have any thoughts about this?
Nothing particular.
Oh, did you generally agree with it?
I thought it was an interesting subject matter, and I might like go back and read over it again because there was a lot of information to think over.
Yeah.
We could have a meeting just where we talk about it.
That's true. Oh, make a good pod. All right, let's keep going.
Okay.